Okay. Hello class, John Marson isn't here. This is the lecture for Monday, April 20th. This is our last week of lectures. We'll be wrapping up 20th century music, at least what we're able to cover in this amount of time. Last week we did an introduction to contemporary music, and I played some of the different styles and mentioned the composers associated with them. We looked specifically at Claude Debussy and the style of Impressionism, right? A musical style which stresses tone, color, atmosphere, fluidity in relationship to rhythm. That was an early 20th century French style, and initially, correct? And now we're going to be looking more closely at primitivism in Igor Stravinsky. And we'll see where time takes us. Maybe we'll start on Schoenberg, or we will just leave that for the next lecture. So, here is the study guide that I am compiling, right? There's what we said about Debussy. This will be posted on Blackboard sometime this week, certainly before the review on Friday for the last exam, which will be next Monday, April 27. And this is what we'll be looking at today. Stravinsky, 20th century, of course. All of our composers are from this period, contemporary music. The Rite of Spring, this is a ballet. Okay, so there's a new genre we haven't listened to or looked at. I'm sure everybody has an idea of what a ballet is, right? Dancing, elegant, trained, sophisticated dancing, okay? Now, when we see the dancing for the Rite of Spring, that will be part of the controversy that we will be talking about. The style of this piece is primitivism, okay? These are composers that are interested in pre-literate cultures, primitive power represented through insistent rhythms and percussive sounds, dissonant, static harmonies, and syncopation. Talked a little bit about that last time, and we'll talk a little bit more about that today. Some of the other characteristics that Stravinsky uses. The music is polytonal, polytonality. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, let's think of some of our words. What about texture? We know what monophony is, one melody. Polyphony, poly meaning more than one melody. So polytonal, tonal music, music based on a scale, polytonal, more than one scale at the same time. Not to get ahead of myself here, but I did mention Schoenberg in the introduction. That's where we will be going next class. Atonal or 12-tone music, music that doesn't have a tone center, right? Extremely dissonant. Well, this music isn't quite that dissonant, but we're headed in that direction. If we have more than one tone center at a time, that can be very dissonant sometimes and less dissonant other times. Something also interesting about Stravinsky, he wrote in many different styles throughout his career, including what we will be listening to and looking at today, primitivism, also neoclassicism, okay? That's a style that we won't, well, I played for you in the introduction to this music, but there's not a specific piece. That's a style that blends contemporary harmonies, right? These more dissonant harmonies that we're hearing in the 20th century with stylistic features and forms of the Baroque and Classical period. So combining the old with the new. So Stravinsky also writes in that style. And And he also writes in serialism, which is a type of atonal music or 12-tone music that Schoenberg is at the forefront of. So we're going to leave that to Schoenberg. But the point here is that all these composers are coexisting and they're writing in different styles. That's why we're looking at all of them. But Stravinsky, more than any of them, wrote in more than one style. So throughout his career, he wrote in different styles. So let's just talk a little bit about that. Stravinsky, his dates, 1882 to 1971. He's a Russian composer. And we can break his music down roughly into 3 periods. So that's what I'm going to do. So his early period, 1908 to 1920, often referred to as his Russian period. He is Russian. He's living in Russia. So during this period, this is when he writes The Rite of Spring. He's a young man, and he writes 3 ballets. There it is. I'm making it bigger for you, for the Ballet Russe. R-U-S-S-E-S, pronounced Russe, the Ballet Russe. This was a Russian ballet company that was centered in Paris at the time, early 20th century. So this is the new hot spot, if you will, right? We talked about early Baroque period. Where was it? It was in Italy was the area where things were happening. And then in the classical period, Vienna, that was the cultural center of music and what was on the cutting edge. Now it's Paris, France. And a term that's sometimes used or was used then would be the avant-garde, the new guard. Avant, A-V-A-N-T dash garde, G-A-R-D-E, spelled that way. The avant-garde, the new guard, that which was new, contemporary. So this period, Stravinsky, a young man in his 20s, he writes 3 ballets for the Ballet Russe. One of them, I'm not going to go into detail with the other 2, but one of them is called The Firebird, written in 1910. Another one called Petrushka, written in 1911. And both of these were huge successes for Stravinsky. Puts him on the map. Something else worth mentioning, of all these composers, Stravinsky is the most, he and Copland are the most successful. Meaning they can make a living solely on composing. Okay? Others, Schoenberg, he's a academic as well. He teaches music composition and theory and other classes at UCLA. William Grant Still, he's a gigging musician. He takes gigs playing the piano in clubs and so on. But we find that Stravinsky and Copland especially the most successful. Well, in any case, getting back to this early period, his Russian period, these 2 pieces make him very successful. Then he writes The Rite of Spring in 1913, which ultimately becomes the one piece that he's most associated with, considered his greatest, the most influential piece. It's a groundbreaking piece because it's doing all these new things that we're about to talk about, this polytonality. But it was so groundbreaking, it was ahead of its time, and it was not accepted. At the initial premiere, there was a riot for this ballet. It was considered to be just way out there in terms of the music, in terms of the staging, in terms of the subject matter. But shortly after that, a month, 2, 3 months later, people started to catch on, and it becomes the most influential piece of the 20th century. Influences everything that comes after this period. And I said this in the last lecture. That's a bold statement to make, but I'm making it, and I'm not the first to make it. It can be made. This is a major contribution to the world of classical music and music in general. So this is considered his Russian period. I mean, we could say that because he is Russian living there. But what we later discover, and it's really not known at the time, or it's probably known by some, but a lot of people don't give it much consideration. In a lot of this early music, Stravinsky likes to incorporate Russian folk tunes into his music. Okay, so not to get confusing, we're going to be talking more specifically about nationalism. That's where you incorporate songs from your homeland into your music so that it sounds American. For example, Copland and William Grant Still are American composers, right? So it sounds like music of the United States when you hear it. This is happening in all countries. Now, Stravinsky's doing it, but he's not doing it to make it sound nationalistic, but he is using it, so we can't deny that. He uses it more as a compositional technique. He likes to just incorporate these folk tunes and then play with them, and we'll look into that more closely. We'll hear it. I'll point them out when we listen to the piece. Okay, so that's his first period, and that's the period we will be focusing on, this one piece. But let's say a couple other things about his other periods, right? Okay, so that was his Russian period, right? So his second period, again, Russian period, 1908 to 1920. Roughly speaking, 1920 to 1955, his neoclassical period, where he's writing in that style that takes old ideas from the Baroque and classical period, but combines them with contemporary harmonies. And he does that, a couple pieces in particular, the Rake's Progress, that's a opera that he's writing in a very traditional sense. We haven't talked about or listened to opera since the Baroque period, where you had clear recitatives and arias. Things have evolved. Well, classical period's pretty much like that too, but in the Romantic period, opera really evolves in terms of obscuring the recitatives and the arias. But Stravinsky writes in a more traditional form. Even uses a harpsichord, which was big in the Baroque period, as we know. Then his final period, 1950 to 1971, he does move to the United States. He becomes an American citizen in the 50s. He lives in Los Angeles. And he writes in an even more abstract style. Serialism, we call it now, but this was the style cultivated by Schoenberg, which was a type of expressionism, atonal and 12-tone writing. So there's Stravinsky. All right, in a nutshell. Now, getting back to the Rite of Spring, let me just throw some other things up here just to want to make sure that I'm still recording. Okay, just to throw some other things up there. There's primitivism. We talked a little bit about that. These are your things that you want to be reading about, right? There's your Igor Stravinsky Wikipedia article. Make sure you take a look at that. So the piece that we're about to listen to, The Rite of Spring, written in 1913, as I already mentioned. Stravinsky said that this piece came to him in a dream. Okay, for what that's worth, it's a very vague way of talking about it, but the inspiration came to him in a dream. So, basically this piece it's a ballet that has no clear story, but it is based on a pagan ritual of sacrificing a young woman to the gods, okay? So that's the story, very vaguely. So it's about a sacrifice, a human sacrifice, a murder, right? A pagan ritual. So that's pretty harsh subject matter. So talking about the riot that took place. Okay, so keep that in mind. There's our subject matter. This is a ballet. What we're about to see, the dancing is not very elegant, what we might imagine as to what ballet dancers or ballerinas do. Okay, it's very primitive and harsh, so unusual movements in costumes, very abstract in that sense. And then the music that we're about to hear, this primitivism sound, these dissonant static harmonies. So all this happening in one piece, a pagan ritual, which is a harsh story, but it's not a clear story. The abstract dance, right? People look at this and say, this isn't ballet dancing. And then we have this harsh music, all of this happening at the same time. There's literally a riot at the premiere. People throwing things at the stage, shouting, screaming, booing. They carried on. And as I've already mentioned, there was a about face on this. Later on, it became more accepted. So let's take a listen. Okay, I'll say some things along the way, and then certainly click on your YouTube link so that you can listen to this without my talking. There's the opening. And this is exactly what you would see. Nijinsky is the choreographer. I'm going to pause it there just for a second. I just want to mention that too. So this piece has been choreographed, meaning the person that writes the dance, many times since it was written in 1913. But what we're hearing is not only the music, but the original choreography by Nijinsky. Interesting to note that Stravinsky and Nijinsky didn't really get along. Stravinsky didn't think that Nijinsky understood his music or did a good job with the dance. But in Nijinsky's defense, nobody had ever heard anything like this or had to write a dance to something like this. So, in any case, this piece is starting with a solo bassoon in a very high register. It's actually using some folk fragments, some Russian folk fragments. Stravinsky studied with a well-known composer, Rimsky-Korsakov, who was also a musicologist or historian. So folk music traditionally is not written down, but a musicologist, a music historian is someone that might collect folk music orally and then write it down and put it in a book. Rimsky-Korsakov does that, and he compiles a book of Russian folk tunes that has never been seen before. When this piece that we're about to hear is written, Stravinsky never mentions that he uses Russian folk music. Decades later, the 50s, the 60s, another musicologist writes a dissertation on this piece and points out these Russian folk tunes and shows them, links them directly to folk songs found in Nijinsky's anthology. So we see this direct relationship. Stravinsky never talked about these pieces as folk tunes, but yet he studied with Rimsky-Korsakov, who compiled them, and they're in his anthology. So that's how he's using Russian folk tunes, and I'll point them out. Even that opening is one. Here it is again, from the beginning. Solo bassoon. These are little fragments of a Russian folk tune. This part is called the introduction, Omens of Spring, Dance. Well, this one is just the introduction section of the Rite of Spring. High solo bassoon, repeated folk fragment that we're hearing. He considers this kind of the awakening of spring. Forest creatures coming out. Doesn't sound too dissonant yet because we just have one melody. There's another one down there gurgling about. Here comes more. Very free rhythm. There's nothing to tap your foot to here. Again, this is the introduction. We're going to see a live performance of the ballet, so the curtain would be drawn at this time. We would not see anything on stage. The orchestra is playing in what's called the pit below the stage. So you could see them if you want, but that's not our visual attention. It's going to be on the stage, the dancers, but certainly this is our aural attention. Getting more dissonant, right? More forest creatures coming out, just doing their own thing, interacting or not interacting. Then this will break into the section known as Omens of Spring, or Dance of Youths and Maidens. This is the most famous Adoration of Earth. This is the most famous portion coming up. The Omens of Spring, the dance. Two dissonant chords, or two non-dissonant chords played at the same time creates a dissonance. Okay, so this is what the people see for the first time. They think, what the heck is this? Is this ballet? Okay, here goes the syncopation. Static harmonies. That's just one chord. Primitivism. Dissonant, static, syncopated. This is right around where the riot begins, where the booing and the shouting and the throwing things. I'm going to point out a Russian folk fragment here in a minute. Right here. Bum, 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 bum. That thing right there. Da, 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 da. It's a Russian folk fragment. Again, he's just using it for a compositional device. Right there. Adding syncopation all over one dissonant static chord. Polytonality. You could also say polyrhythms. Different instruments doing different rhythms at the same time. Here we go into the next section. Finally, moving. We're going to hear a second folk melody fragment right here. That's it. Here it comes again. Now we're going to start layering different parts, different rhythms. You could also call this ostinato. There's another Russian folk tune, layering on top. There's that original Russian folk tune coming back. Okay. Now you might be hearing something like this for the first time and seeing something like this for the first time. This might be a way of just letting the music and the dance wash over you, and perhaps getting some kind of an appreciation for it. And maybe not. I'm not trying to convince you, but think of it this way. Rather than trying to figure this out, what is this bizarre music? What is this bizarre dancing? Rather than trying to figure out what it is, just soak it in. Listen to the sounds. Look at the movements. Okay, who knows what they're doing or why they're doing it? But is it visually spectacular and interesting, along with the music? Well, that's up to the individual subjectively, if you enjoy it one way or the other. Moving into another section. So notice every time we move into a new section, once we get there, we just sit there for a bit. So that's the idea of these static harmonies. There's a melody layered over. Listen to that. Listen to this ostinato in the bass. Bom, 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 bom. So that's what we mean by ostinato. It's repeated over and over again. It's like hip-hop music, rock music, something that happens over and over with things changing up above. Ostinato. Right? Ostinato, still there. ostinato. Right? We're building in intensity, but we haven't gone anywhere. Okay, that's all we get. Oh, look at that. Pierrot Lunaire is our next piece. Actually, probably I'm going to start on that today so that the next lecture isn't too long. So let's see where we are. Stravinsky. Okay. Rite of Spring. The style is primitivism. And there's your definition. Uses polytonality. Wrote in many different styles throughout his career. Primitivism, neoclassicism, and serialism. This one is specifically primitivism. Uses polytonality. We could even say polyrhythms and ostinato. I can revise that later and we'll do so. Okay, let's say a few things and let's move on to our next composer, Arnold Schoenberg. The piece that we will listen to is Pierrot Lunaire, Song Cycle. The style of this piece is expressionism. What is that? Musical style that stresses intense subjective emotion through harsh dissonance, complex rhythms, etc. Well, didn't we just hear harsh dissonance and complex rhythms? Well, if you can imagine, this will be even harsher dissonance and more complex rhythms, typical of German and Austrian music of the early 20th century. Atonal music, meaning without a tone center, later becomes 12-tone music. Why 12-tone? Well, how many notes in a chromatic scale? 12. So that's where he gets the labeling. So Schoenberg, this is a revolutionary style of writing and thinking of music. Everything up to this point is based on a scale, right? Even the Stravinsky, as abstract as it is, he's using scales, but sometimes he's using two different scales at the same time. Polytonality, right? That's what makes that dissonant. But here, to get rid of scales altogether, that's unprecedented, right? We never had that in music. So if you think of classical music up till this point, and any other type of music, folk music, jazz music, rock, pop, whatever, it's all based on a scale. So all of those different styles that seem so unrelated are related in that respect. This music does not have a tone center. So Arnold Schoenberg, so initially when he starts writing in this style, right, his dates are 1874 to 1951. He starts to write in this style in the early 20th century. Let's say around 1908, he starts to write what we might call free atonality, meaning he's just using his ear. And the piece that we're about to hear by him, Pierrot Lunaire, is free atonality. He does not have a system, a theory for writing the music yet. And he finds that it's difficult to write extended pieces without having a system. So that's when he devises the 12-tone system. It's a specific way of writing atonal music. So why the word 12? Why the number 12? Because it's based on the chromatic scale. Let's see if I can pull up a piano here, huh? Here's a major scale. Look at this. All the white keys. Now what if 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is 1 again? These are all conveniently labeled. C2 meaning this, there's a C1 that's off the view of our pad right here. So that's a major scale. Now what about all these black keys? Well, if I put those in, that's a chromatic scale. How many notes do I have now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1 again, and so on, right? It just repeats itself. So there are only 12 notes in our musical system. So that's what he's using. All right. So Schoenberg, along with two of his pupils, who we can later consider to be colleagues of his, work on this style, this new way of writing music. And these three guys together are known as the second Viennese school. Okay, so where I have written, he's part of the second Viennese school. He could say he's at the leader of it. He and Webern and Berg are his pupils / colleagues. The second Viennese school. Okay, well, who was the first Viennese school? I never used that word before, but let's think about it. Viennese, Vienna. That's where this is happening. And when did we have three composers writing what was considered new music at the time in Vienna? Three big composers. Well, if we were in class, I'd wait for you to answer this question, which you can't, so I'm going to tell you. Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, the classical period, right? They cultivated what was then a brand new systematic style, right? Writing very methodically in sonata form, rondo, theme, and variation. Well, here we have three guys again in Vienna writing in this very methodical, rigorous, systematic style that sounds nothing like that, other than the fact they're in Vienna and it's methodical and systematic. Okay, so how is it methodical and systematic? Okay, so I'm going to attempt to define just the basics of this style, because it's very mathematical. So how do you create a 12-tone composition? Notice those row, transposition, inversion, retrograde, inversion. So that all has to do with ways of manipulating the 12-tone row, the 12-tone notes of the chromatic scale. So see if this makes sense. The row, in a sense, is what we call is our melody. So imagine taking the 12 notes of the chromatic scale and arranging it in a specific order. Let me attempt to do that right here. Okay? So well, it's not random. I mean, it's going to sound random. I'm going to play those 12 notes in a specific order. And this would be my melody, if you will, or, my row. And the rhythm would have something to do with it too, but I'm just focusing on the pitches now. Okay, 12 notes. I think I attempted to play 12 different notes. That would be my row. Or my melody. We're going to call it a row because that's what they called it. And it probably doesn't sound like much of a melody to you. So that would be the basis of my composition. Then I'm going to manipulate that row. How can I manipulate it? I can, first manipulation, transposition, to transpose it. Play that exact melodic shape, that contour, but start it on a higher or lower pitch. That would be how you transpose it. That's one manipulation. I could also invert it. Inversion means to flip it upside down. So let's say my original row went up by a major third and then down by a perfect fourth. Well, I would flip that, go down by a major third and up by a perfect fourth. You see, what used to go up now goes down. Just flipping it upside down. Retrograde, that means to play it backwards. So, whatever your first note was is now your last note, right? Whatever your second note was is now your 11th. Your third was your 10th, right? You play it backwards. Retrograde. And then finally, retrograde inversion. If retrograde means to play backwards and inversion means to play upside down, retrograde inversion, backwards and upside down. Okay? So, you have a 12-tone row. You have 12 pitches in the scale, right? So that means you can transpose it starting on any of those 12 pitches. And then you can invert it, retrograde, and retrograde inversion. You have 4 possible manipulations of the row: transposition, inversion, retrograde, retrograde inversion. 12 times 4 equals 48. So therefore you have 48 different permutations of the 12-tone row. There is the heart of writing 12-tone music. Okay? All right. Now certainly it gets much more involved than that, but I'm hoping that all makes sense. Especially if you have, math skills, even basic math skills. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so that's what he is doing, okay, to write this music. It's a brand new system, and you can imagine it's very controversial, not only then, but certainly today. Even by those who listen to classical music, find this music to be pretty harsh. Maybe they don't like it so much. Now, if that's not abstract enough, let's mention one other thing that Schoenberg uses in the piece that we are about to hear. He uses Sprechstimme. Those of you that speak or study German, Sprechstimme, to speak, half speaking, half singing at the same time. So, at times he's writing very specific notes, usually very specific notes, always very specific rhythms. But sometimes he'll indicate a general pitch. Go up here, go down there. So leaving a little bit of variation as to how the singer can half speak, half sing the melody. Okay? So there you have it. That's what Schoenberg is doing. So we're about to hear a piece. Big explanation for something that's going to last 2 minutes, as we'll hear in just a moment. So the piece that we are about to hear by Schoenberg, right? You can look him up on your Wikipedia article. The piece we're about to hear is Pierrot Lunaire. Okay, Pierrot Lunaire. So Pierrot is the quintessential sad clown, right? We've all have seen the sad clown, right? The clown that has, instead of the happy face, the smile painted down, maybe a painted tear on the makeup. Pagliacci was another sad clown figure that was used in an opera in the 19th century that we didn't talk about. So this is our figure here, Pierrot Lunaire. Charlie Brown, he's a kind of a Pierrot Lunaire, somebody that's always putting his best foot forward, but in the end, his deeds or what he's trying to do is foiled, right? Lucy always pulls that football out from underneath when he goes to kick it. So that's our figure here. Let's see, I have, here's the text. Let's see if I could pull this up. There it is. All right, so this is a song cycle, so meaning the several songs that based on poetry by a Belgian poet that was translated into German. And Schoenberg set these poems about this sad clown figure, Pierrot Lunaire, to music. And this one is called Columbine. So that is the Pierrot's, the woman that he loves, that he's madly in love with, who dupes him and is unfaithful to him. Sounds a little bit like Symphonie Fantastique, although the woman in that story just rejected him from the get-go. She wasn't unfaithful. But in any case, it's that idea. So here is the English translation of this abstract atonal piece that we're about to hear, and we'll hear some word painting. We know what that is. So there's the English translation. Moonlight's pale blossoms, the miraculous white roses blossom in the night of July. Oh, if I could pluck just one. Look at that music, word-music relationship in the last column. When we hear that plucking, if I could pluck just one, we hear the plucking of the violin. So we'll hear some of that word painting. And so that's the text right there that we're about to hear sung in German. And it's an atonal piece for a small ensemble, which we are about to see. And we'll point them out as we hear them. So here's the piece, Pierrot Lunaire, Opus 21. That's just the publication marking. We know that from before. Columbine.
Des Mondlichts bleiche Blut, die weißen Rosen blühen in den Julinächten. Oh, brech ich eine Mauer. Mein banges Leid zu lindern, such ich am dunklen Strom des Mondlichts bleiche Blüten, die weißen Fugerrosen. Gestillte all mein Sehnen, dürft ich so märchenheimlich, so selig leis entblättern auf deine braunen Haare des Mondlichts bleiche Blüten.
Okay, I just thought I'd let you hear that without me talking. We're going to hear it one more time. It's just so short. So this time, I'll just point a couple things out along the way. So again, remember, this is atonal music. This is pre-12 tone. Sounds the same, but at this point, there's no specific method for writing it. Do we have some of that inversion and retrograde? Yeah, we do in a very natural, freer way, but it's not a system at this time. There's the use of Sprechstimme too when she's singing. Sometimes she's singing a specific pitch, and you could probably tell. Sometimes she's just almost speaking. Here we go. One more time. Moonlight's pale blossoms, the miraculous white roses. Blossom in the nights of July. Oh, if I could pluck just one.
brech ich eine
Okay? That's the first stanza, okay? Here's the second.
mein banges Leid
To still my anxious suffering, I seek alongside the dark stream.
des
Moonlight's pale blossoms, the miraculous white roses.
weißen Vorrot.
Sprechstimme there, the way she's phrasing that.
Gestillte ein
Last stanza. All my longing would be stilled if I could, in fairy tale fashion, secretly and softly pluck onto your brown tresses moonlight's pale blossoms. Pluck. Hear that staccato or plucking gesture there.
des Mondlichts bleiche Blüte.
Okay, so again, very controversial sound. Notice the audience size. Not a lot of people there, huh? That would be a standard concert, right? They're not packing them in for this music. So it looks like we're in a church. Maybe there are 30 people there. So a very small following, and it's hard to tell the expression on some of these people, but maybe they don't all of them don't even like this. Who knows? But again, very controversial during its time, and still is. That's not to say that there aren't many that love this music and write this music and cultivate this. If I were to say something objectively positive about it, is that whether you like it or not, it does give a different way of thinking about music, and that's always a good thing. Something to spur on creativity in some fashion or another. There have been other composers that would use this style, this way of thinking, to write music that actually sounds quite tonal, but they might come up with ideas that they would not have if they were not thinking in this way. So, looks like I covered, and I'm glad I did, because that's about 50 minutes of a lecture, and, that's all you need to know about Stravinsky and Schoenberg. This will be posted shortly. I pretty much have everything in that I want to have, but I just want to double, triple, and quadruple check that I didn't leave anything out. Like I said, I'll add in under Stravinsky not only polytonality, but polyrhythms and ostinato, and the definitions for row, transposition, inversion. So that's it for now. I'll see you on Wednesday as we move forward, looking at the syllabus. Since we already covered Schoenberg today, we'll be going right into William Grant Still and Aaron Copland, our two composers of nationalism. And then Friday will be just Steve Reich, minimalism, and we'll have a review for the exam, which is Monday, April 27, on the hour, 12 o'clock for Section 1 and 1 p.m. for Section 2. So that's it for now. See you Wednesday. Stay healthy and safe.